weekend that rewind my life. I was 18 years old the first time I heard steel doors slam behind me. Even now, years later, that sound still crawls into my dreams sometimes. Heavy, final, like the world itself had decided to close its mouth and swallow me whole. People imagine that getting arrested feels dramatic at first. Sirens, fear, chaos. It doesn't, at least not for me. At first it felt stupid, pathetic, embarrassing. I kept thinking about how unbelievably small the thing was that ruined my life. A phone. Just a stupid phone sitting inside a glass case at Walmart. I remember standing there beside my friends laughing like idiots, while one of them dared me to take it. I remember the bright fluorescent lights above us, the smell of cheap plastic packaging, the bored mother pushing a cart past the electronics section. Everything looked painfully ordinary. That was the terrifying part, because only 20 minutes later my hands were cuffed behind my back, while a loss prevention officer explained my rights to me in a voice that sounded almost bored. I still remember staring through the police car window at the Walmart sign glowing in the rain. People were walking in and out with groceries while I sat in the back seat, like an animal being transported somewhere dark. I kept thinking, this can't actually be happening. But it was. And because it was a Friday night, the officer told me I'd be spending the weekend in county jail until court opened Monday morning. That sentence changed the temperature of my blood. County jail. Before that night, those words belonged in movies. Not my life. Not me. I wasn't a criminal. I had never even been suspended from school. But none of that mattered once they took my fingerprints. Once they took my belt. Once they took my shoelaces. Once they told me to change into orange. That was the moment something inside me cracked. I remember standing alone in that tiny changing room, holding the folded jumpsuit in trembling hands. The fluorescent light above me buzzed softly while I stared at my reflection. I looked younger without my hoodie. Scared. Fragile. I looked like a child pretending to be a criminal. When the guard finally escorted me into the holding area, every instinct in my body screamed that I did not belong there. The room smelled like sweat bleach, and something rotten underneath both. Men sat scattered around metal tables beneath harsh white lights. Some had tattoos crawling up their necks. Some looked exhausted. Others looked terrifyingly relaxed, like this place was just another Friday night to them. The moment I walked in, several heads turned toward me. I lowered my eyes immediately. Fresh meat, someone muttered. A few men laughed. Another called me pretty boy. My face burned so hot I thought I might faint. I tried sitting quietly near the wall, pretending not to hear them, but my entire body was shaking. I kept thinking about my parents. My mother was probably crying. My father was probably disappointed in a way words couldn't describe. That thought hurt worse than the handcuffs. Hours passed slowly. Or maybe minutes. Time worked differently in there. At some point they allowed us phone calls. When my mother answered, the sound of her voice nearly destroyed me. I turned away from the others and pressed the receiver hard against my ear. Mom. The word broke apart in my throat. She immediately started asking if I was all right, if they hurt me, if I needed a lawyer. I could hear panic hidden beneath her voice. Then my father got on the phone. He wasn't yelling. That somehow made it worse. My father had always been the kind of man who believed silence carried more weight than anger. We already contacted an attorney, he said quietly. You'll see the judge Monday. Monday. It sounded impossibly far away. After the call ended, I had to walk back into that room full of strangers while pretending I wasn't seconds away from crying. That was when I first met Walter. Or at least, that's the name he gave me. Later that night, a guard led me toward a narrow corridor lined with cells. The sound of distant shouting echoed through the concrete halls while fluorescent lights flickered overhead like dying stars. The guard stopped at cell 14. Inside sat a man probably in his late 50s. Gray hair, thin glasses, calm eyes. Compared to everyone else in that place, he looked almost normal, almost civilized. He sat on the lower bunk reading an old paperback novel beneath the dim light. When I entered, he looked up slowly and smiled. Long weekend, he asked gently. His voice surprised me. Soft, educated. European maybe, or something close to it. I nodded, awkwardly. First time he asked. Again, I nodded. He gave a sympathetic smile. Don't worry, he said. The first night is always the worst. I cannot fully explain how comforting those words felt back then. After hours surrounded by shouting men and cold stares, Walter sounded human. Safe. The guard locked the cell behind me, and for the first time that night, I felt slightly less alone. Walter introduced himself and offered me the lower bunk. I told him he didn't have to. He insisted. It's easier climbing up there when you're my age than when you're terrified, he joked softly. I even laughed a little. God, thinking back on it now makes my stomach turn. At first, Walter was kind, painfully kind. He explained how mealtimes worked, told me which inmates to avoid, warned me never to stare at anyone for too long. You look frightened, he told me quietly. People here notice fear. I asked him what he was in for. He smiled faintly. Poor decisions, he replied. There was something elegant about the way he spoke, not like the others. He used words carefully, almost poetically. At one point, he asked what I wanted to do with my life. Nobody had asked me that since my arrest. I told him I wanted to study architecture. His eyes lit up. That's beautiful, he said softly. Building things instead of destroying them. For a moment, I forgot where I was. That was his gift. Walter had a way of making the cell feel smaller, quieter, like the world outside still existed. But slowly, things changed. Tiny things at first. The kind of things your instincts notice before your mind does. He started asking personal questions. Where I lived. If I had a girlfriend. Whether my parents were strict. Which college I planned to attend. At first I answered politely, but eventually the questions became too personal, too interested. When I stopped responding clearly, he simply smiled. You're careful, he observed. I guess. That's smart. Something about the way he said it made my skin tighten. Later that night, while we sat in silence, Walter suddenly reached over and brushed dust from my shoulder. The gesture looked harmless, but I froze instantly. His hand lingered slightly too long. He noticed my reaction. Of course he did. I apologize, he said softly. But he was smiling. That smile stayed with me. Not wide, not insane. Just knowing. Hours later, the lights dimmed for sleep. The jail became strangely quiet. Not silent. Never silent. Somewhere distant, a man screamed profanities. Metal clanged. Someone laughed too loudly. But inside cell 14, there was only darkness and breathing. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling for what felt like forever. I could hear Walter moving occasionally above me on the top bunk. Every sound made my heart race. At some point, exhaustion finally dragged me into sleep. I don't know how long I slept before something woke me. Maybe instinct. Maybe fear. Maybe the feeling of being watched. My eyes opened slowly. The cell was dark, except for pale light leaking through the bars. And there he was, Walter, standing beside my bed, looking down at me. For one horrible second, neither of us moved. His face was half hidden in shadow. His glasses reflected the dim hallway light. I couldn't breathe. Then very softly, he smiled. You remind me of someone, he whispered. My throat tightened. Walter tilted his head slightly. Someone I used to love. And then he just stood there, smiling in the darkness, while every survival instinct inside me began screaming that something was terribly, terribly wrong. He followed me home. I did not sleep for the rest of that night. Even after Walter climbed back onto the top bunk, even after the sounds of the jail settled into distant echoes and metallic groans, I remained frozen beneath the thin blanket, staring into the darkness. Every few minutes I looked upward. Sometimes I could hear him breathing. Sometimes I couldn't. And somehow the silence was worse. I kept replaying the moment in my head. The way he had stood beside my bed. The softness in his voice. The smile. It was not the smile of a violent man. That was the terrifying part. Violence would have been easier to understand. Walter felt like something colder than violence. Something patient. Morning eventually arrived in the form of fluorescent lights snapping alive overhead. A guard banged against the bars and shouted for breakfast. I had never felt so exhausted in my life. Walter climbed down calmly, as if nothing unusual had happened. Morning, he said pleasantly. I stared at him for a moment too long before quietly responding. He noticed immediately. He noticed everything. You didn't sleep well, he observed. Neither accusation nor concern existed in his voice. Only certainty. I'm fine, I muttered. Walter gave a faint smile. "No," he said softly. "You aren't." Then he walked toward the bars for breakfast, as though our midnight conversation had never happened. That entire day felt unreal. I avoided being alone with him whenever the cell doors opened. I stayed in the day room pretending to watch television while my nerves slowly destroyed me from the inside. But every time I looked around, Walter somehow seemed close. Never too close. Just enough. Watching. Always watching. At one point, while several inmates argued loudly near the phones, Walter sat beside me at one of the metal tables. "You remind me of myself at your age," he said. I forced a weak smile. "That bad?" He chuckled quietly. "No," he replied. "Still innocent enough to believe people are what they pretend to be." The sentence settled heavily in my chest. I looked at him. For a second, his expression seemed almost sad. Then he smiled again, and whatever humanity I thought I saw vanished behind that smile, like a candle being snuffed out. Later that afternoon, he asked me something that made my blood run cold. "Does your mother worry often?" I turned toward him instantly. "What?" He tilted his head slightly. "You mentioned her during your sleep." I felt physically ill. I did not remember dreaming. I did not remember speaking. But the calm certainty in Walter's eyes told me he was not lying. From that moment on, I became terrified of sleeping near him. That second night was worse than the first. Much worse. The deeper exhaustion pulled at my body, the more paranoid I became. Every sound startled me. Every movement from the upper bunk made my stomach tighten. At some point after midnight, I heard Walter whisper my name. Quietly. Almost affectionately. I kept my eyes shut. Pretended to remain asleep. For several seconds, there was only silence. Then I heard movement. Slow movement. The creaking sound of someone climbing down from the top bunk. My heartbeat became so violent I thought he would hear it. The footsteps stopped beside my bed. I could feel him standing there. I swear to God, I could feel his eyes on me. Then I felt something lightly brush my hair back from my forehead. I nearly screamed. But fear locked my body completely still. Walter leaned closer. I could hear his breathing now. Warm. Steady. "You should never trust lonely men," he whispered. Then the footsteps retreated. The bunk creaked again overhead, and I spent the remainder of the night staring into darkness, while my entire body trembled beneath the blanket. Monday morning finally came, like mercy. When the guard called my name for court processing, I almost collapsed from relief. Walter looked genuinely disappointed. "Well," he said quietly while I gathered my things, "perhaps this place hasn't ruined you after all." I didn't answer. As the guard escorted me away, I glanced back only once. Walter stood inside cell 14 watching me leave, smiling, not waving, not speaking, just smiling. That expression followed me all the way to court. The hearing itself blurred together. My attorney spoke. The judge spoke. My father stood behind me in silence, wearing the same gray coat he wore to funerals. I barely remember anything except hearing the word "released." Outside the courthouse, cold rain drifted through the pale morning air. My father drove us home quietly. For almost 20 minutes, neither of us spoke. Then finally he sighed. "You scared your mother half to death." The shame inside me felt unbearable. "I know." He kept his eyes on the road. "You made a stupid mistake," he said. "Don't make another one." That was all. No screaming, no lecture. That somehow hurt more. When I finally returned home, I took the longest shower of my life. I scrubbed my skin until it burned. But I still felt dirty. Still felt watched. That night, I slept nearly 12 hours. And for a brief moment, I convinced myself it was over. I was wrong. 3 days later, I received a follow request on Instagram from an account with no real name. No posts. No followers. The profile picture was dark and blurry. Normally, I would have ignored it completely. But something about it unsettled me instantly. I clicked the profile. My stomach tightened. The bio contained only 2 words. Cell 14. I blocked the account immediately. Or at least I tried to. Before I could, a message appeared. One single image. When I opened it, every ounce of warmth vanished from my body. It was Walter. A close-up selfie. Same glasses. Same calm smile. Same dead eyes. Underneath the image was a message. "Miss you already." I dropped my phone onto my bed like it had burned me. For several seconds, I simply stared at the wall, trying to breathe. How did he know my name? How did he find me? I had never told him my last name, never mentioned social media, never given him anything. At least, I didn't think I had. That night, I locked every door in the house twice. I told myself I was overreacting. People can find information online. Maybe jail records were public. Maybe it was coincidence. Maybe. But deep down, I already knew something was terribly wrong. 2 days later, I came home from work just before sunset. Rain clouds covered the sky, turning everything gray and colorless. As I pulled into the driveway, I noticed an old sedan parked across the street. The engine was off. Someone sat inside, head lowered, motionless. I stayed inside my car watching for almost 30 seconds. The figure never moved. My skin prickled. I quickly grabbed my backpack and hurried inside the house. The moment the front door shut behind me, I locked it. Then I locked it again. The silence inside the house felt oppressive. I walked into the kitchen trying to convince myself I was being paranoid. Then I heard it. The front doorknob slowly turning. Not knocking. Not ringing the bell. Turning. Testing. Back and forth. My entire body froze. The sound stopped. For maybe 20 seconds there was silence again. Then the back door handle began moving. Slowly. Carefully. Someone was checking if the doors were locked. Panic exploded inside me. I grabbed my phone with shaking hands and dialed 911. While whispering to the operator, I heard footsteps outside. Then, the doorbell rang. Once. Twice. The operator asked if I could see who it was, but I couldn't move. I stood there in the kitchen, staring toward the hallway, while every horrible possibility filled my mind. "I think it's someone from jail," I whispered. The operator told me officers were already on the way. Then the doorbell rang again. Longer this time. And beneath the sound of the rain outside, I heard someone softly laughing near the front door. The photo under my bed. The police arrived 7 minutes after I called 911. I know the exact amount of time because I counted every second. I stood in the kitchen gripping my phone so tightly my fingers cramped while the rain battered the windows and the front porch light flickered weakly against the storm outside. After the laughter stopped, there had only been silence. No knocking, no footsteps, nothing. That somehow terrified me more. When the officers finally searched the property, they found no one. No forced entry, no footprints, nothing except rainwater dripping from the gutters and the old sedan disappearing at the far end of the street. I tried explaining everything. Walter, the jail, the messages. The officers listened politely, but I could see skepticism growing in their eyes the moment I admitted where I had met him. One of them asked if maybe I was just stressed after my arrest. Another suggested blocking the account and trying to move on. Move on. As though fear were something you could simply step over. As though terror politely disappeared when ignored. After they left, my father checked every door and window twice. My mother barely slept that night. Neither did I. The next few weeks slowly poisoned my life. I stopped feeling safe anywhere. Every stranger became suspicious. Every unfamiliar car made my chest tighten. At work, I caught myself checking reflections in windows behind me. At night, I woke repeatedly to imagine sounds near the house. Footsteps. Whispers. Breathing. Sometimes I would stare at my bedroom door for hours, convinced someone stood on the other side. But the worst part was not the fear. It was the uncertainty. I never knew whether Walter was truly there, or if he had already crawled into my mind deeply enough to stay there forever. Then came the bar. I almost wished that night had never happened, because before then a small part of me still believed I might have imagined the danger. That illusion died the moment I saw him again. It was a Friday evening, almost 3 weeks after my release. My friends invited me out to a small bar downtown. They knew nothing about Walter, nothing about the messages, nothing about the nights spent staring into darkness, unable to sleep. I told myself going out would help me feel normal again. For the first hour, it almost worked. Music echoed softly through the crowded room while people laughed around the pool tables. Warm yellow lights reflected against bottles behind the counter, and for the first time in weeks, life felt ordinary again. Then I saw him, at the far end of the bar, sitting alone. Walter. He wore a dark jacket and a baseball cap pulled low over his forehead, but I recognized him instantly. Somehow, he looked exactly the same as he had in jail. Calm. Patient. Watching. My blood turned to ice. At first, he pretended not to notice me. Then slowly, deliberately, he lifted his glass toward me in a quiet greeting, and smiled. Not a wide smile. Not threatening. Just familiar. As though we shared a secret nobody else in the room could understand. I nearly dropped my drink. One of my friends asked if I was all right. I lied immediately. Yeah, I muttered. I just thought I saw someone I knew. But my voice sounded wrong even to me. Walter never approached. He didn't need to. That was what made him terrifying. He simply remained there watching me unravel from across the room. Eventually I told my friends I felt sick and wanted to leave. The second we stepped outside into the cold night air, I looked back through the window. Walter was still sitting there, still watching. The moment I got home, I finally told my parents everything. Not just the messages. Everything. The nights in cell 14. Walter standing over my bed. The touching. The whispers. The laughter outside the house. My mother looked horrified. My father became very still in the way men do when anger becomes too deep for movement. The next morning, he drove me directly to the police station. This time with screenshots of the messages, and my parents beside me, the officers took things more seriously. The detective interviewed me privately for almost an hour. When I described Walter, the detective's expression slowly changed. Not fear, recognition. That frightened me more than anything else. "Did he ever tell you his real name?" the detective asked. "No," I replied quietly. The detective nodded grimly. "That's because Walter isn't his real name." Something cold moved through my stomach. The detective explained that the man I knew as Walter had a long history of stalking behavior after release from custody. He targeted vulnerable young men, especially first-time offenders, especially isolated ones. The detective never used the word predator. He didn't need to. I understood. By the end of that week, we filed a restraining order. The detective advised me to lock all social media, vary my routines, never walk home alone, immediately report any sightings. I remember asking the question I had dreaded most. "How did he find me?" The detective hesitated before answering. "Some inmate information becomes public after booking," he admitted. "Names, charges, sometimes addresses if someone digs hard enough." I felt sick. One stupid mistake at Walmart had opened a door to someone monstrous. And now he knew where I lived. For a while the restraining order seemed to work. The messages stopped. The strange cars disappeared. Weeks passed. Then months. Slowly life attempted to become normal again. But trauma does not leave cleanly. It lingers quietly inside you like smoke trapped beneath walls. I stopped sleeping properly. Every night I checked beneath my bed before lying down. Every night I locked my bedroom door. Sometimes I woke suddenly convinced someone had whispered my name. Once I could have sworn I saw a figure standing in the corner of my room. But when I turned on the light, nothing was there. My parents tried to help. My mother suggested therapy. My father installed security cameras. Neither fixed the fear, because the fear was no longer entirely outside the house. Part of it lived inside me now. About 6 months later, I almost convinced myself Walter was gone forever. Then came the final night. I had fallen asleep sometime after midnight while watching television. Rain tapped softly against my bedroom window. The house was silent. At exactly 3:17 a.m., I woke abruptly. No sound, no nightmare. Just a sudden, overwhelming feeling that something was wrong. The room was dark, except for pale moonlight stretching across the floorboards. For several seconds, I simply lay there, breathing. Then I heard it. A faint scraping sound. Under the bed. Every muscle in my body locked instantly. The sound came again. Slow. Gentle. Like paper dragging across wood. I couldn't move. I stared at the darkness beneath my bed, while terror spread through me so violently it almost hurt. Finally, with trembling hands, I reached toward the lamp beside me and switched it on. The room flooded with warm light. The sound stopped. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then I saw it. An envelope partially sticking out from beneath the bed. My stomach dropped. I knew immediately that it had not been there earlier. I slid off the mattress slowly and pulled it free with shaking fingers. Inside was a photograph. The moment I saw it, I stopped breathing. It was me, sleeping in cell 14. The angle looked slightly elevated, as though the photo had been taken from the top bunk. My face looked pale beneath the dim jail lighting, and beside my bed, standing in the darkness, was Walter, watching me sleep. I felt nausea rise violently into my throat. On the back of the photograph, written carefully in black ink, were 7 words. "You reminded me of my son." I don't remember screaming. My parents later told me they found me collapsed against the wall, unable to speak properly. The police searched the house again. Nothing was stolen. No signs of forced entry. No fingerprints. No evidence Walter had ever been there. But I know he was, because the photograph still exists. Even now, years later, I keep it locked inside a box I cannot bring myself to destroy. Sometimes I stare at it too long. At the smile on Walter's face. At the way he looked at me while I slept. And sometimes in the middle of the night, I still wake suddenly with the unbearable feeling that someone is standing beside my bed in the darkness, quietly watching me breathe.